I'm Jason King, the Byrne Chair and Director for the Center for Catholic Studies at St. Mary's University. In today's episode, I speak with Dr. Donna Freitas, an author, cultural critic, and speaker whose work spans faith, relationships, and contemporary culture. She was here at St. Mary's to lead a faculty workshop on writing, but we couldn't pass up the chance to sit down and talk about her book, Wishful Thinking: How I Lost My Faith and Why I Want to Find It. In our conversations, she opened up about her own journey of faith. Welcome to Beyond the Lecture. Welcome everyone to our conversation tonight with Donna Freitas. She's part of our series Beyond the Lecture. Donna, could you tell a little bit about yourself?
Well, Jason, I got my PhD in religious studies and gender, with a focus on spirituality, about 1 million years ago. With you, we went to the same graduate school. And then after that, my life and my career and my studies really morphed. And I began to do national studies about different things that college students were asking and experiencing. And I did a national study about sex on campus, sex and faith on campus, which led me into the space of talking about Title IX on campus and its evolution in the last, 15 years or so now, or 14 years or so. And as that part of my life was unfolding, I started writing novels, which was not part of my plan. And then those novels led to more novels, and now I've written many, and I don't remember how many. It's probably like 15 maybe. And I've also written 2 memoirs. And so this is my second memoir, Wishful Thinking. The first one is related, even though it's very different. And it was called, is called Consent, a Memoir of Unwanted Attention. And it's my Me Too memoir. And it's also related to the Catholic abuse scandal. But I would say this memoir is, it's about, I really called the question on who I am as a person of faith or not a person of faith, as the case may be. And I would say it has a lot of darkness in it, but also has a lot of light. It's much lighter than my first memoir. So that's a little bit of an overview, I guess, of my background. Yeah. I
wanted to follow that up and ask how you ended up in Catholic theology.
That's a great question.
Yeah. And part of it comes from as you started off this sort of memoir, your early years being in this sort of Catholic milieu, and then questioning that very early on, and yet still persisting in several Catholic institutions. Yes. And then that sort of relationship of sort of finding yourself with Catholic theology.
Well, so we were discussing earlier today how I have never not been in a Catholic school. So my entire education was at Catholic institutions. We're talking from nursery school. I went to Lily Pads, which was a Catholic nursery school, all the way to my PhD. So you can make your own judgments about how they did. So, but I came from a very Catholic family. My mother was Italian. I lived with my Italian grandmother. My father was Portuguese, and it was just part of our life and our family life. And so I went to catechism classes. My mother taught Sunday school, the whole thing, and I began to doubt at a very early age. Around the time I was 6 years old, and I never stopped doubting, and I never stopped asking questions in relation to God and faith and why are we here. And even though I think those questions daunted my parents, they really entertained them as well. They talked to me about those questions. And when I got to college, as an accounting major, because my parents checked that box, because you always need accountants. And I started taking philosophy classes because I went to a Jesuit institution, and they believe in the liberal arts, and I had to take 2 philosophy and 2 theology, and I really discovered that I could pursue all of these questions in this other space. And I never in a million years would have dreamed I would end up getting a PhD in religious studies because I was a very outspoken atheist all through college. And I would say now looking back, I was a bit of a fundamentalist atheist. And when I was a senior and I knew I wanted to get a PhD, one of my wonderful professors at Georgetown sat me down and was like, Donna, did you know that did you realize that all of your questions, your philosophical questions, are also religious questions? And I was like, what? And then I thought,
I'm not so sure about that.
I was like, and I realized she was right. And her father had been a religion professor, and she gave me his book. It was called Breakfast at the Victory, and she had me read it. And I went home and I read it. His name was James P. Carse. And I was like, Professor Carse is right. And that's how I ended up in theology. So that's sort of the arc of it. Lots of questions, lots of atheism. Apparently all those atheist questions were also theological.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long did your accounting major last?
About 4 months, one semester. And then, I think I kept it all freshman year because my parents didn't want me to switch. And we had a big showdown about that one because let's see, my dad didn't go to college, my mother did, but they were really seeing me. I was like their great hope. They both came from immigrant families, and they were like, there are no jobs for philosophy majors. And I was like, college is for learning, and which they also believed, but it was a struggle, but I eventually, obviously, I became a philosophy major. Yeah. So it didn't last very long. I think I switched in secret, and then they found out at the end of freshman year, and then they tried to make me go back. It was a big thing, but,
I was a math major. I made it all the way through sort of 4 years.
Yeah, I knew that.
And then had graduate school in math, a job in computer science, or volunteering at a Catholic middle school. And when I said I was going to volunteer at a Catholic middle school, my dad said, whoa, what?
Teaching?
Yeah, teaching.
Yeah.
And then on to graduate school, sort of in theology.
Yeah, I remember
precisely
that
for the
about
same reasons, like these questions that were just, I couldn't find answers. I wasn't able to ask those in the fields that I was sort of in. Yeah.
And then you kept going. And here you are.
And then I kept going, and here we are. Yeah. Trace out a little bit then, like your scholarship, like after sort of, and maybe I'll prompt this by like one of my very first successes was an article we did sort of together, and that started this trajectory of your sort of scholarship. You mentioned some of that, but why don't you sort of say a little bit about some of your key books that you've written?
Well, so when I became a professor after graduate school, I was, I've always been a teacher at heart. My mother was a teacher. And so I was raised by this really vibrant teacher, and so I was always very interested in what my students were thinking about or what they wanted to ask. And I was also working in residence life, and so I was living with students and just sort of being with them in their lives. And one of the things I learned really quickly was how much students, and we talked about this together, how much students were really wishing for a space, like a classroom, like the space of the classroom to talk about their relationships, their romantic relationships, and also just sex, and ideally sex and spirituality. They were really interested in these topics. And so I think for both of us, because we wrote about this topic together, but also for me, I was teaching in this area, and I decided to launch this national study about sex and faith on campus. And so that really changed the course of everything in terms of my scholarship. And I'm still in that space, I would say. Like it's part of how I ended up in all the conversations about Title IX on campus. I had been talking about sex on campus for a really long time. I'd been talking about sexual assault because it came up in my research. And at a time when nobody wanted to talk about it on campus, where like people would want to bring up the question, but it would get kind of shut down. Before Title IX became this mandatory thing colleges had to do. And so my scholarship in that area just kind of kept going. And as it was going, I also stepped away from academia in a traditional sense.
The book was Sex and the Soul. And I
Yes.
remember you're not only like when it came out, but even beforehand, trying to conduct research where like you would get shut down at certain kinds of places just to try, because the topic itself was sort of dangerous. But that wasn't your sort of trajectory. You're trying to find out like a constructive sort of enterprise. How do you sort of put these pieces together that I thought was really interesting? That seems to be like behind all of those sort of pieces. How do you Because it's also interesting that you write fiction. How do you see those two things coming out of who you are?
Well, so when I wrote my first novel, I wasn't planning on writing a novel. I didn't grow up wanting to become a writer. I think of my writing, like my becoming a writer, as a series of accidents that happened, and then they became intentional when I realized, oh, I really love this. And I wrote my first novel because I was grieving my mother. So my mother died 20 years ago this summer, and I was devastated. She was just a huge part of my life. She was also really funny. She was this funny lady. And she had these amazing stories about growing up in this immigrant family, and like these stories about wildly large fig trees that they would have to bury in the winter, and all the hoopla around that. And she grew up above an Italian market, and they would do all the cooking upstairs and like making trays of cookies, and then they would sell them downstairs, and they made like Italian sausages, the whole thing. And so that was her life growing up. And she had these amazing stories. And so when she died, I was really sad. And I had always incorporated novels into my work and my teaching. And I was reviewing lots of novels. I was specifically reviewing young adult novels. And I just decided I'm going to write a story about basically my mother as a child. Like, she was the inspiration because I wanted to stop thinking about her death, and I wanted to start thinking or remember her life. And so I kind of like took from my own life and then also took from her stories, and I wrote this novel when I was really sad, and it's a comedy. And I wrote it. And
I think in this part of, if I remember correctly, one of the main character's quest is to find the patron saint of first kisses.
Yes, it's about she's nominating herself to be the first ever living saint to the Pope. So she's like writing the Pope letters and proposing different saints. And my mother loved the saints. So
and
there's
Augustine
a lot of saints.
Didn't make the cut.
No.
First kiss.
No, Augustine would be like, no kissing for you. But literally the reason why I wrote my first novel was because I was sad and I wanted to make myself laugh. And incidentally, I haven't written a comedy since. Oh, that doesn't mean all my novels are dark, but they're not all dark. But I haven't read like a straight up comedy until 2 years ago. My father died, and I wrote my second comedy. And I did the same thing. I wrote to make myself laugh, and it just came out this summer. Yeah. So I've written 2 comedies. Hopefully no one else has to die for the next one.
Well, we are getting older. We talked about that, so.
Yes. Jason.
Say a little bit about the motivation behind this memoir, Wishful Thinking.
So this memoir, the subtitle is, so it's Wishful Thinking, How I Lost My Faith and Why I Want to Find It. And in some ways, this is the book I've been avoiding writing for 20 years because I use books to do all sorts of things, obviously to crack myself up, but also often just to figure out what do I think about something, or what did I live, and I often tell my writing students, because I teach writing now, your most urgent questions, like the things that just are at the center of your heart, like put them to a book and figure them out on the page. And so this question that has been in me forever is, why am I not a person of faith? Why is faith such a struggle for me? Especially when I come from this family, and in particular this mother, who faith was her joy. And so I wanted to know, what about this whole faith thing? Can it be mine as well? And I decided to try to figure it out by writing the book. Yes.
Yeah. 2 questions. One, we've been having, in some ways, this conversation for many years about this struggle with sort of faith, and I've always kind of insisted that you're Catholic anyways, despite your intentions. And part of that then leads to my real question is that in the book, and I don't want to, again, give too much away from the book, but you make this distinction between the big C and the small c sort of Catholic, and I think that's an interesting one to help think through some of those issues. So can you say a little bit about big C Catholicism, small c Catholicism, as you talk about it in the text?
Everyone who reads the book brings this up. And I really got this from one of our professors in grad school. This was Professor Kamontek, who I would sit in his office. We would talk about this. And so the big C church is the institutional Catholic Church. And then the small C church is like the people. The church is made of people. And there's a part of the book, there's a chapter called God is in the Lasagna. And because when my mother got sick, she had cancer, and it was this, big tragedy in our family's life because she had stage 4 ovarian cancer, which is, when you find out you have it that late, it's just, it's not good. And so I came home from graduate school, and it was just really awful, and she had this big surgery, and they didn't know if she was going to make it through the surgery, and we all got back, and she was, had this really major recovery ahead, and I was at home cooking. Like my grandma had Alzheimer's, and my dad couldn't boil water, and I was like, I'm going to have to leave graduate school, and I was just sort of taking care of my family, and the doorbell just started ringing, and it was just like neighbors and church people, like people from our parish, just showing up, just one after the other, like all day, all weekend, like just for days with food. And I mean, just lots of lasagnas. That's why I was like, and I just remember thinking, my dad was like, what are we going to do with all of this? And I was like, we're going to freeze it. I'm like, this is how you're going to eat. Like, I'm going to be able to go back to graduate school. But I felt this incredible outpouring that we didn't ask for. Like, people had found out that my mother was sick, and like, just the things that people did to keep our family afloat from this community of, she was a Catholic school teacher, so from the school, but also from our parish. And I think about it all the time. I just think about how that is how we got through that time, and all the incredible generosity. And to me, that is Catholicism at its best, right? It's the people who are around you who show up and who get you through the darkest parts of your life. They're with them. And I think, the big C church is the pomp and the circumstance. And unfortunately, which I talk about too, it's the abuse scandal, and it's the stuff that you can't abide. And I've spent a lot of time in my life really angry at the big C church, and sometimes I think letting it chase me away. And it's taken me a really long time, a lot of adulthood now, to hang on for dear life to the small C church, which I think is what allows me to apply the word Catholic to myself. And also just, the bishops and the cardinals and the Pope did not give me this tradition. It was my family and the people around me and the nuns and the priests who taught me that gave me this tradition. And I'm trying my best to stay there, and sometimes it's hard, but that's the difference. Sort of like the big C is, in some ways, I think of it as like the big bad church. Can I say that on camera? And
we can edit it out.
Yeah. So, and then the people all around you that embrace you when you, and that you embrace too when they need you.
One of the things that I've always liked about your writing, and it comes out here, is that kind of direct honesty of dealing with it. You're not going to soften these things or soften the tension or collapse one to the other because this was good. Then I'm not going to look at this stuff, and holding those pieces together. And I remember a conversation we had when you were talking about one of your novels is about how much can you push the audience to like kind of make them not so much uncomfortable, but to confront those sort of truths. And it's a difficult sort of tension because you want to sort of keep them, but you also don't want to lie or deceive them. And so I appreciate that sort of trying to recognize both of those dimensions that are operative as well.
Yeah, the question I always ask is, how much do I think the audience can bear? And I try to, in the books that I read, I try to push people or their question as far as I can without going past that point where I feel like maybe people aren't ready or I'm not ready or we can't quite go there yet. But it's always this balance.
Speaking about what the audience can bear, maybe they've bared enough of me, and we'll open it up to a few questions we'll start with some questions from the audience, and hopefully a kind of dialogue will sort of emerge from us as well. So questions from the audience.
Yes.
Do you think asking those uncomfortable questions, just in any regard to Catholicism, kind of challenging that will change anything at the institutional level to make it more like the little c, or do you think it's just maybe like a more, it has to be more than just asking the questions?
Are you asking if it's a lost cause?
Yeah.
That's a great one.
What are the steps that you take after those questions come up? Because, we all have questions, but what do we do about those questions?
Can the small c change the big C?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good, can the small c
great
change the
question.
big C? Or, I mean, maybe that is the question, right? And I think part of the problem is the big C is afraid of the small c and the change, that might happen. Yeah, I mean, I go back and forth. I've joked with some of my students in the past. So way back in the day when I was teaching women in spirituality, that was kind of like the course I always taught that I really loved. We would sort of talk about what are the different ways that we could sort of reframe things, or is there hope, or do you just have to sort of vote with your feet and leave? And I think I would tell them that, they would be surprised when I would say I was Catholic, because I would say to them, sometimes I've joked about how I'm a professional Catholic. Like, I show up as Catholic in public circumstances in some ways just to, needle the bishops who don't want me here. But it feels important to say I'm Catholic. And so my students would be surprised, and I would say, well, the Catholic Church is this really big space, right? It's like this huge, enormous house. Imagine it's this enormous house. Like, sometimes I'm in a hammock in the yard, and then sometimes I'm in the street picketing and heckling or protesting, but I'm never really inside the doors. And I would say that is how I still feel. And I think that has to do with the fact that for me, the hierarchy is this kind of obstacle, and I don't know how you change it. But at the same time, it's a big place. It's pretty roomy in here, actually, in this tradition. I do think it has room for me. I feel like my mother made room for me. My family and my community made room for me. Jason made room for me. My teachers over the years have made room for me, and I try to remember that as an invitation. And so I think some of it maybe has to do with what do we choose to allow to dominate what Catholicism is in our minds, and is the hierarchy, and I mean, some people love the hierarchy, I'm aware of that. So is the hierarchy so big and that we can't see past it? Or can we kind of if they were cutouts, could we move them over and allow ourselves to see the other aspects of the tradition that are with us, or even just not with us, or not in our view? My mother was always talking to the saints, and I really I really believe that she was talking all the time, while she was cooking and while we were driving to school and when we were in the supermarket. There was always a conversation going on with some saint or other. And I feel like my mother taught me to talk to the dead. And now that both my parents and my grandparents are, gone, I feel so grateful for that. But I think it's also what turned me into a novelist. And so I just feel like she empowered me to just talk to the people I can't see. And so I guess, can we stay there if that's where it's meaningful to us, and then they can just go off and have their little meetings in their outfits. I don't know. And then we can just do our own thing. I mean, I know that probably doesn't work for a lot of people, but Yeah, I'm not sure what else to do.
Yeah, I would add, I think one of the reasons why I appreciate this and appreciate you being here is also like just trying to imagine the church in different ways, and part of that in and of itself is trying to reimagine, I think, the church. So
yeah, it's over
different
there,
spaces.
but it's also here.
Yeah.
Like that's, if we let it be. Dave.
So, Donna, one of the things I appreciate about you is you live your faith very transparently, authentically. Your struggle is public. And I imagine, I think this is where my question, that gives a lot of people hope that you are a guide for people who are also struggling, but you're vocal about it. So I think my question is, how is that received? Do you find that your ministry to people gives them hope because of your authenticity? Do you get pushback from that? You're living very vulnerably. You live your faith very vulnerably. So I'm curious how that's received.
Well, I didn't know I had a ministry. But thank you. That was such a nice way of framing things. Thank you, David. I guess I don't, I would say sometimes what I feel is ashamed and almost stupid. That here I am still after everything, especially I have a background with unfortunately I have a background with the abuse crisis. And so sometimes I wonder, do people think, do they think that there's something wrong with me for still sticking around when I've struggled so much? Or do people judge me for still saying I'm Catholic, despite all the things that I've been through and all the things I've lost, I would say, because of this tradition. Because I've gained and I've really lost in ways that are really formative and tragic, I think. And so sometimes, like especially in New York City, so I've lived in New York City for many years, where there are religious people, but like everyone I know, I feel like the publishing world, the writing world in New York is very secular. And I think sometimes there's this question of why are you doing this? Just walk away. Like it's just been trouble for you. And so I think sometimes I feel almost ashamed that I can't let it go. And I have this moment, which I think I wrote about in the memoir. I can't remember if it got cut or not. But I just remember I feel like it was like around 2012 or something, and a bus went by in New York and it had some advertisement. You know how there's always around Easter, there's those specials about like Jesus's tomb and like the real, we filmed it. There's some sort of, the real Jesus or the real story. And it was going by and I was thinking, I'm not going to watch that, even though I'm going to know all these people who are talking on it because I know these scholars. And I remember thinking, I was like, I'm so glad I'm done with all that Catholic theology stuff. And so I was having that moment when the bus went by. And then, like 6 months later, I'm like, I'm just lying to myself thinking that that's done. Like I'm so not done with all of this. And so I think sometimes I wish it was over because I've been so harmed by it. But I also, I can't let it go. My family gave it to me. And it is my education. And it is so much of who I am. And so I think even though I've had these dark moments when I haven't wanted it to be mine anymore, I don't think I can let it go. And I think one of the interesting things we were talking earlier at dinner about this book coming out is that there are a lot of people, I think, that are on the edges of faith, or they're trying to be in a tradition that doesn't quite hold up in lots of ways for them. And it's been interesting to have, I think people are craving for complicated stories of faith and faith journeys. And a lot of the ones that are out there are like, look at, like, I was in the darkness, but now I'm in the light. There's a resolution. And I think I was joking about how on a podcast I was on that I'm less of a person of faith and more of a person of doubt. And because doubt is really a huge part of my journey. And I think what I've found out recently, I think, is that there's a lot of people of doubt who are asking and asking and asking questions and searching and don't necessarily have neat answers, but aren't going to stop pursuing them. Yeah.
I would not describe myself as a person of doubt.
I wouldn't either describe you that way.
But I remember in college when I was like kind of making the faith my own, and it's Kentucky and Appalachia, and so I assumed, oh, if you're serious about your faith, then you're like a fundamentalist. And so I didn't know where to go with that because I was not that, and I had serious questions, and I was looking for some way to continue to sort of ask those questions and pursue those. And so even with some of those differences, right, that's one of the things I feel like we connect on, that sort of openness to questions. And if I hadn't been able to do that, I wouldn't have been able to sort of make it. Like, and so that there's that questioning that's always sort of given me life. So.
Well, I always think about William James's. So has anybody, if you've read The Varieties of Religious Experience, I was really obsessed with that book in graduate school. He comes up with 3 categories of religious person. So there's the healthy-minded, there's the sick souls, and then there's the divided selves. And my mother was definitely the healthy-minded. Like, faith was just a joy to her. Like, she didn't have trouble believing kind of thing. And she really wanted it for me. And I'm like, I'm either a sick soul or a divided self. I'm probably sick, definitely sick. But I've always wished for some kind of resolution, I guess. But I never quite get there. But I do think that I am often thinking, okay, like, I'm this person of doubt. I'm always asking these questions and always wondering, like, was that real or am I just kidding myself? That's where the title of my book comes from, Wishful Thinking. I titled the book after my father died. I knew immediately what the title of the book was going to be because when he died, what I wanted, what I told myself, and what I was just like, I'm just going to keep talking to my dad even though he's not here. And I was like, my mother raised me to believe that I could. And then I would, in my head, I'd be like, it's not real, but I wanted it to be real. And then, I would just say, I just wanted to let myself have this. And I would say, oh, it's Donna, it's just wishful thinking. But I just kind of go through this cycle. But I also feel like on the other side of all those questions, right, is like, what else is, maybe God's right on the other side of those questions. And maybe the fact that I keep asking them brings God closer. I don't know.
Yeah.
I was wondering, as you wrote the book, you were looking at faith and what it kind of meant to you. And when you got to the end of the book, do you think you had a different definition of what faith could look like? And if you were to look back now, do you have earlier experiences that you think, maybe that was an experience of faith? And I thought about it because you talked about your mom. And I thought, if that was the example of what I thought faith had to look like, I probably would think I didn't have faith either. Because people who haven't read the book, there's the whole thing with the angels in the back seat that saves your dad. Everything like that. I'm like, that's not my experience of faith. And so I wondered how that sort of affected what you thought faith had to look like. And if that perspective has sort of changed over time.
It's funny. So my mother talked to saints. She believed she had angels. We had angels everywhere. We had pictures of Mary, and I grew up in one of those houses. It's funny because my mother never imposed that vision of faith on me. She didn't really care what my faith looked like, as long as I didn't have sex. But until I got married. So we bracket that. But she didn't really care what my faith looked like or how I expressed it. And in fact, she would have all these conversations with me. And I remember, because I was always being an atheist around her, and she really wanted to fix that. But so she would come home and she'd be like, Donna, what if God was a woman? How would you, so she was just ready to morph, to make it work for me. So I never felt like I had to be faithful like she was. But so for me, when I wrote the book, I was like, oh, wow, this is a really big question to put to a book. What's going to happen? How am I going to do this? And I will tell you, so I really wrote through all the like major moments and formative aspects of my life with regard to faith for this book. And I was writing, and I was doing this right after my dad died. And so it was a very intense moment to be writing a book about faith since I was grieving. And I always write toward answers. And I always tell my writing students, you discover things as you write, and often like you don't even know really what you think until you've written it. And that's one of the joys of writing. And so, I was writing, and then I had this whole book that I wrote, and unlike my other memoir, which is really dark, it was just full. Like I felt like one of the miracles of writing, especially writing a book like this, is I felt like I had just spent all this time with my family, because my mother's in it, my dad's in it, my grandmother's in it, and I was like, what a miracle to be able to spend this time with these people that I love, and really looking at all the ways that they shaped me, and all the things that they gave me, and all the people who have shown up for me and my family, and like my teachers, and then writing showed up for me, in the time when I needed it most, and saved me in a lot of ways, which I've said a lot in the past. And so I've got all of this right here, and I was, I was like, well, what else? What else is this? Like, what else is this but faith? Like, here it all is. Like, I believe in all of this. Like, I believe in everything I've said, and I believe in everyone that's here. And why can't I call this, why can't I call this faith? And, I think it's like right there in black and white and in the words. And I often feel like I write my way into, I save myself through writing, or I am saved by my writing. And I figure out what's there that really means something. And so it doesn't feel perfect, maybe. It's not, I'm sure it wouldn't make Orthodox people happy or like conservative Catholics happy, maybe, but it's what I was given, and I could see that it was there, I guess. Yeah.
So as you've been talking about your faith experience, and this might be just part of this memoir, you were talking about how it's about your dealing with the grief of losing your dad. I'm wondering about the faith experience of your dad. You've spoken so much about your mom and how she's really impacted you. But when I think of the problems I often have with the church, right? I think of the little C church, and I think that, and this could be me stereotyping, but I think of my life experience in the church, probably a lot of the people of the small C church, the ones bringing the casseroles, the ones who are knitting everything together, it's the women, right? They're passing down the faith through the generations, I think, a lot of the time. And then we do have this hierarchical male structure. I'm thinking of the inside of the church, and then the women. And it seems like you're talking about your faith so much in relation to your mom, but not so much to your dad. But the memoir is about your faith and your dad. So I'm wondering, what was your dad's faith like, and how did that end up, I guess, translate into your faith experience too?
Well, so I mean, my dad is definitely in the book, but he's less in the book than my mother, and it's because he had just passed away, and it was hard to write about him. It was fun to write about him in vibrant ways, but it was hard to write about him in the ways I think that I would like to now that I've had a little bit of distance. But I would say, like, one of the questions I brought to the book was like, how could a woman like my mother give birth to a person like me in terms of faith? And I am my dad. So my dad is all dark night of the soul, or he was. He had a lot of humor and a brain for math, which I got. And he was the one who doubted. Like, he was just full of doubt, and he struggled with darkness. And so when I think about how, my mother was this like creative, wacky lady in, all sorts of ways, and I think I see the creativity that she gave me and raised me with, and I think even though my dad was really against my philosophy major, I got the darkness from him. And so I would say we both had those incredible struggles like all through our lives. And, you know, it's the part that's hardest. Like I wrote a lot about my relationship with the abyss and despair when I was, you know, younger especially, but I have a lifelong relationship with the abyss. And I think he did too, even though we didn't talk about it so directly. But I also feel like it's that part of me that's so, I think it also turned me into a writer and turned me into someone who went to get a PhD. So even though he felt like we were so different because he never went to college and then I went and got a PhD, and I was very proud of my PhD despite the fact that he was not in favor of the philosophy major in the beginning. But I do think that side of him is really what, in many ways, what's driving all those questions. Yeah.
I'm a theology major here, and it's really cool to see you be so successful and kind of have that like similar background. I have a great community and I have lots of friends and family who are supportive of me nonetheless, but there are definitely a lot of people who think I'm wasting my time and going down the wrong path. And my question is, was there anything that you said or did to your parents or whomever to kind of convince them and give them confidence that you weren't throwing your life away?
Well,
No.
no. You know, it's really funny. My parents were really like, "You're gonna go get a PhD too? Okay." Like they just really thought when I graduated from Georgetown, the philosophy business was over. You know, that I was gonna go and make some money. You know, I was gonna go get jobs, and which I did. I became a teacher. So, lots of money in teaching. But when I applied to graduate school, I got lots of scholarship offers from different places, and I was talking to my dad about it, and he was like, "Wow, it's kind of like you're almost like a basketball player," because he's a big NCAA fan, and I was like, "Yeah, Dad, I'm amazing. I'm being recruited," and that was sort of a turning point. I think some of it was because I wasn't going to have to pay, but I think a lot of it, I mean, eventually my parents came around partly because they loved me and, you know, they were like, okay, she has health insurance. That was their big worry. And like, I was supporting myself. My first job out of college, I actually lived in a walk-in closet. Like that was what I could afford. I paid $300 a month for my walk-in closet. And so, but I was doing it. I was like taking care of myself, which was the bargain my parents gave me. So I think that they started to see that I could take care of myself, but then I was happy. And I think they wanted me to be happy. And they could see that I was, and so they began to support it. And they also began to see that they couldn't, you know, they couldn't do anything about it. But even though my dad, I've written over 20 books, and I guess probably around 20 by the time my father died, and he never read a single one. But he was really, because he just wasn't, he read the newspaper. If it wasn't in the newspaper, he wouldn't read it. He wouldn't read it. But he would tell everyone at his bar about all of my books. Like he was very proud of my books. And he wouldn't necessarily know the titles, but he would like know they were coming out, and he would ask me about them. And we just got to this point where his most exciting question was, how much are they paying you? And then he would divide whatever they were paying me by the number of words that might be in the book or the number of pages that I might write in the book, and then tell me how much I was writing per word or per page. And that was just kind of his way in. And I knew, like, he would sort of show me he was proud of me. And so people used to ask, like, are you upset that your dad never read your books? I was like, well, no, he was supportive of me in other ways. And so I think, I don't know, I hope that your parents or like people's parents want to see you flourishing, and if you're flourishing, my guess is eventually they'll come around. Even my really worried parents did. So
it's a good question. It's funny. That's the same. My parents were always supportive, questioning. I was a math computer science major, so this is a very different sort of tack. But when you're suddenly making money and you have health insurance and you're paying your rent, they're like, hey, good job.
Yeah, our parents were kind of similar. We have
Yeah.
similar, different backgrounds, but similar
Yeah.
sorts of
They were
parents, working class
Yeah.
parents.
You did not use these words to describe your mom, but it always resonated with the way that I think about my mom and my dad, which was just what I learned from them is that God loves you. Like, that's it. God loves you, period. There wasn't anything else. And I keep coming back to that in all of those good times and bad.
Yeah.
So, all right, we're at the last. It's time for the Catholic quiz.
Don't give me a Catholic quiz.
No, it's not even a quiz, but I did want you to, and this is my kind of concluding question with all the people that I interviewed, and that fits on well with a question about a theology major in the future. What do you think about the future? What's the future of the Catholic Church in the United States?
Oh gosh.
see, and you've got 30 seconds. And just more like speculate. I'm wondering. I have this belief that like things are changing, and how do you hold on to the good things in the midst of sort of the change that's sort of coming about? And is there hope? Can the big C change? And I won't hold you to your answers, I promise.
I'm glad you feel hopeful. I would say the parts that feel hopeful to me are the things that happen in rooms where you have conversation and questions and dialogue, or you have the people who show up with the food when or show up at your door when you're on the floor and you can't get up yourself, right? So, but I've definitely felt like the Big C Church or the Catholic Church, it feels like it's been in a dark moment for me for a long time, because for me that's related to the abuse scandal, and I feel like I will be waiting until the day I die for someone to apologize for what happened to me, and I don't think anyone ever will, and no official person. And it doesn't matter how I ask. It doesn't matter if I beg and plead. It doesn't matter if I get angry. I will never, for the people who need to apologize, who know they need to apologize, as you know, I don't think they ever will, because they're so afraid of lawsuits. And they're just, And so they'll just let me wait for that apology forever. And I think it's really hard to want something so tiny that doesn't cost any money, that's just a few words and maybe a look in the face, and have it be so impossible to get, especially from people who are standing up and claiming to be models of morality, and I don't know how to live with that. And I try really hard to live with that, or to sort of be a part of a community or stay a part of a community, but I'm pretty up and down about it. And I don't like feeling hopeless about that. But that has been a personal and enduring experience that I think is mine. It will be mine forever, and I don't know how to get around it. So that's a really dark answer, but let's see. Let me think of something positive.
You don't have to think of something positive.
I guess I would say that always the most positive thing for me is that, we were talking about Catholic institutions, of which a couple are represented in this room. And for me, the most hopeful places in the Catholic Church are at universities, which are spaces for dialogue and openness, and I think honesty and forgiveness and hope in ways that I don't really see in the sort of more Big C Church. So we have these oases all over the United States, and I think they're incredibly valuable, and I also feel worried and sad that many of them are closing. And so I would say for me, if there's hope, or there is hope, and that's where it is, because they gather us all together, and they, in theory, ask us not just to think about like, how am I going to make money after I graduate, but what does it mean to live a meaningful life? and what does it mean to be a good person, and what is social justice, and how do I live that out in a daily way in a community. So that's where the hope is for me.
That's very nice. Yeah, I have, that's kind of where my hope is. It's like you have a wonderful speaker and a wonderful topic, and you have a bunch of people show up on their own on a Monday evening to come sort of listen, talk, and share. So thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for having me.